Okay, so this video is to show you how you can actually write a list to a text file and then retrieve that list back into your program. So what I've done here is I've written a program so far, which is just a little program to record a Christmas presents buying list for friends. So what we've got here is we've declared two lists that are empty, one called names and one called presents. Then we've got a little menu system looping around. It's going to print an option to enter names and presents and then save it, and then another option to view names and presents from the saved file. So if I actually run this program, this is what it looks like. So this program is to record a Christmas presents shopping list for friends and family. So if I was to press 1, how many people am I buying for? I've only got 2 friends, no one likes me, so I'm going to type in 2. Enter a name, Dave. Present, I'm going to buy him a bike. Enter another name, Jim. Enter a present, I'm going to buy him a car. Okay, so I've entered 2 names and 2 presents. The names have gone into the names list and the presents have gone into the presents list. And now what I can do is I could press 2 to view that. Okay, so Dave has got a bike and Jim, I'm buying him a car. So that's how the program works at the moment. Very, very simple. If option 1 is pressed, then we're going to print a few lines of nothing. Then we're going to ask how many people am I buying for. Going to store that in a variable called number, obviously convert it to an integer first, and then I've set up a loop which will cycle through that amount of times. It'll ask to enter a name. I'll store that in a variable called name, and then I'm going to append what I type in into the list called names, and I'm going to repeat and do the same for presents. I'm going to enter a present and store it in a variable called present, and I'm going to append what I type in and put it into my list, and that's obviously going to cycle through, adding to the list for the amount of people that I'm buying for. When that loop has finished, it goes back to the menu. If I choose option 2, what it does is it looks at how many people I've bought for, and it cycles through that amount of times, printing the different names and presents in turn. So the first time round of the cycle, X is going to be 0, and it's going to print the names and the name that is at index 0 in that particular list, and then it's going to print out the present that is at index 0 in the presents list. It will cycle round so that X is 1, and it will do the next item in my names list, and then the next item in my presents list, and it will cycle through until it has gone through how many people there were to buy for in the first place. So that's how the program is set up at the moment. Now what I want to do is I want to set it so that I can actually save the list to a text file, and then if I press option 2, it will retrieve that data, because obviously if I was to close this program down and try and run it now, and I went straight for item 2, it doesn't have any data in it at the moment. I need to actually save the different names and items to a text file so that if the program closes, I can then load it up again and then retrieve all that data. Okay, so to just give you a little bit of background information, there's a few issues that we've got to contend with. Let's just load up this particular slide here. There we go. Okay. So it's quite a bit of information here on the screen, but let's just go through it line by line. So string variables. Remember that a variable holds one item, and if it's a string variable, it's going to hold an item which is of a string data type. So that means it could be any word, could be any mix of words, numbers, symbols, but it only holds one single piece of data. It's just a container to hold one bit of data. So that if I was to have a variable called name and it contained the word Bob, if I printed that variable, Bob would appear on the screen. A list, remember, holds lots of different items, and each of those items is indexed, which means it has a position, so that if I had a list which had 5 different storage areas, I would have one data item at index 0, another data item at index 1, and so on and so forth. And remember that if I was to actually have a look to see what that list looked like, if I printed out my list called names, it would actually print it out with these brackets and each data item inside speech marks, okay, separated by commas. So it doesn't look very nice really. When I print that to the screen, the list all in one go, we've got all this extra stuff that we need to deal with. Whereas if I was to print my list but I actually said what index item I wanted to actually show. So if I printed names 0 inside the square brackets, then Bob would appear on the screen. If I entered names 1 in brackets, Dave would appear on the screen, and names 2, which is obviously that third item, it would print Jim without any speech marks, without any square brackets or commas or anything like that. So that looks a little bit better. So again, lots of text here, but just looking at it line by line, converting a list into a string. So whenever we try and write data to a text file using the method that we looked at in the last video, there are limitations, unfortunately. You can only write a variable which contains a string data type to a text file. You can't actually write a list as it is, or an integer data type, or anything other than just a variable, a simple variable string data type to a text file. So if you've got a list, then you have to convert it to a string first of all, and that's a really simple thing to do, but there are obviously issues with it. So if we had a list called names, what I can do is I can convert that list into a string just by using this str function. Okay, so that is going to convert the list called names into a variable. So name, okay, will now contain that list, but it's only in one sort of container, it's in one box. So I can't actually go in and see what the first item is anymore, or the second item, because it's all bundled together. So the problem is that that variable now contains all the items together, but also with these speech marks, these brackets and commas. So that whole thing is just in one variable, and it looks a little bit nasty. So that when it's stored into a text file, that's what it will look like. But retrieving from it is quite difficult, because if I wanted to retrieve that back into my program and have a look at the first item, second item, third item, I've got to do a little bit of work on that. Okay, so that's what we're going to have a look at now. So if I go back into the program, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to try and write to a text file. So to do that, after I've entered in my my list of names and my list of presents, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first of all have to just very quickly convert those into variables so that they can be ready to be saved onto a text file, because what I want is my text file to be stored here. You can see there's no text file at the moment, but that's where it's going to get stored. So what I do is I go names equals str names, and the same here, presents equals str presents, like so. So those lists, the names list and the presents list, are now converted into strings. So names is no longer a list, it's just one variable which contains all of the names that I've entered, and presents is one variable with all of the presents, and it has speech marks, has brackets, and it looks horrible. So if I now write in a few lines, what I can do is I can start to write that to a file, a text file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down presents file equals open, and I'm going to give my file a name. So let's call it presents.txt, and I'm going to after I've created that text file and opened it, I'm going to open it up in write mode so that I can write to it. So now what I've got is I've got a little handler, a file handler in the program called presents file, which will contain all the information about trying to connect with this text file and be able to read and write from it. So that file handler, what I can now do is I can start writing to it. So I can do presents file dot write, and I can write to it names. Then what I can do is I can do presents file dot write, and so that it's not all on one same line, all the names and presents on one line of a text file, what I'm going to put in is just \n, and that will then make sure that I write a new line. So it will go onto a new line on the text file, so that I can go presents file dot write, open brackets, and then presents, like so. And then finally what I've got to do is I've just got to close presents file dot close brackets. So if I now save that, remember there is no text file here at the moment. What I'm going to do is just run this program now, and I'm going to press 1, how many people am I buying for? 2. Enter the name, Dave, present, bike, another name, Jim, a car. I'm going to press enter. So it's now gone through all of this. It's converted my list to a variable, and then I've actually written the variables onto a text file. So if I now go in here, you'll see that the text file is here. I can double click on it to open it, and then I'll be able to see how it's been written. So you can see that Dave and Jim are the list of names, although it's not a list, it's a variable, has been put onto the first line, and then bike and car on the second line. And along with it are these speech marks, are these brackets and everything else, which is really annoying. So that is now done. I can close that one down, and now I can get on with trying to add some lines of code so that I can actually read that data, because if I run it here, it is still stored in a text file. Okay, it's still here, but if I try and actually press 2 to actually view the names and presents, okay, there's an error because it can't actually access this file yet. I've got to put a few lines of code in. So let's get on and do that now. So what I need to do is I need to, just like before, I'm going to have a little file handler, but this time, instead of opening it in write mode, I want to open it up in read mode. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little, I'm going to put all of the lines of this particular file, oops, presents file, dot read line, brackets. What that's going to do is it's going to read each line of the text file, and it's going to put it into a variable called lines. It's actually going to put it into a list called lines, so that what I can then do is I can then get each of those lines and put them back into my variable. So I might want to say that names equals lines square bracket 0. So that's the first line in the text file. That's all going to go into my variable called names. And then what I'm going to do is say presents equals lines, oops, 1. Okay, so the second line, all those presents that have now gone into the presents variable, and the first line has gone into the names variable. To use something called a replace function. And what it's going to do is it's going to try and replace all the brackets with nothing, all the speech marks with nothing, all the commas with nothing. So I'm going to set up the following. I'm going to say I want to replace all of the open brackets with nothing. Okay, so between these speech marks, that's what I want to find. I want to find all these brackets. I'm going to replace it with what is between these speech marks, which is nothing. And then going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it again. And this time I'm going to change that one to close brackets. I'm going to get all the commas, sorry, all the speech marks, and change those. And then I get all the commas as well and replace those with nothing. And I'm going to do exactly the same down here. And now run it. Let's have a look to see what we've got. Okay, if I press 2, you can see we've got Dave and Jim, we've got bike and car, which is perfect. So what it's done is it's read each of the lines in turn, and because I've used these replace things here, so if I just remove one and show you what happens instead. Okay, what it's done is it's found Dave and Jim. Because I didn't replace all of the open brackets, speech marks and commas in the first one, when I print names, you can see that all of that is there with it. If I actually replace all of those brackets and speech marks with nothing, then when I print presents list, you can see it's just bike and car, which is much better. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll put that back in. And now what I need to do is I just need to finish off my program. And the way to do that is by doing the following. I've got a variable called names, and it contains all of the names, but obviously I need that to be in a list if I want to actually write that back nice and neatly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create a new list called names list. I'm going to create a new list called presents list, and then I'm going to use what's called a split function, and I'm going to say that I want names list to contain my variable names, but with it split up every time it gets to a space, Okay, it's going to split it up, so it's going to split up Jim and Dave into two different items, which will be put into the first and second place or position in my names list. I'm going to do exactly the same for presents. Those presents lists equals presents dot split. So now all I've got to do is I've got to set up my loop for x in range number, which is the number of people early on in the program, and I'm going to simply print each item of my names list in turn, and then I'm also going to print each item of my presents list in turn. Whoops. Like so. Okay, so fingers crossed this will now work. So external run, press 1. How many people? 2 people. Enter a name, Dave. Enter an item, present, even, bike. Enter a name, Jim. Enter a present, car. And now we'll retrieve those 2 things, and you can see that it's Dave and bike and Jim and car, and that's been retrieved from the old text file that we should be able to see in this folder here. And there it is. It's been saved and it's been retrieved, but I've been able to retrieve it back from this line. I've got rid of all of these brackets, all the speech marks and everything, and I've been able to place that back into a list that I can then cycle through and display on the screen.